In the mid-1960s, a set of government documents that would simply be known as the Pentagon Papers were created. They featured a comprehensive history of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War and would eventually be featured on the front page of the New York Times in 1971. The documents were leaked to the New York Times by a former employee at the Pentagon named Daniel Ellsberg. The ensuing legal battles, which made it all the way to the Supreme Court in the case of New York Times Co. versus the United States, sparked a great deal of debate regarding the rights of U.S. citizens to government information and whether it is the federal government's responsibility to inform the public on information such as the contents of the Pentagon Papers. But is it our right as the people of the United States to know this kind of information? And should the government be obliged to tell us? The documents that would later be dubbed the Pentagon Papers, called the McNamara Study, at first were discovered by Daniel Ellsberg, who was then an employee at RAND but had previously worked at the Pentagon before he was fired for being untrustworthy with certain documents. In his memoir, Ellsberg describes deciding immediately, on the night of October 1st, 1969, to copy the 47 volumes of information which filled 2 entire filing cabinets and reached nearly 8 feet in the air. It was a long time before these findings would be released, but in early 1971, the New York Times anonymously received a massive pile of documents from who we now know as Daniel Ellsberg. After much internal discussion, it was decided it was in the best interest of the United States of America for them to publish the papers. Naturally, this was a very controversial event, and the New York Times would be taken to the Supreme Court. However, in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of publishing companies, and the justices argued that the prohibition of the New York Times from publishing the information would make a shambles of the First Amendment. Meanwhile, as New York Times versus United States of America continued to be debated in the Supreme Court, there was another facet of this issue for the government to deal with. The leaker, Daniel Ellsberg, would have been tried for his treachery. Doing so would not be a very easy task, since before long the Supreme Court would rule in favor of New York Times, and public opinion swayed toward them and Daniel Ellsberg. In a second White House meeting, then President Richard Nixon would authorize the creation of a secret task force that was hell-bent on finding dirt on Daniel Ellsberg. Headed by E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy, these plumbers would break into the office of Ellsberg's psychiatrist to find something that would be used to turn the public's opinion of Ellsberg against him. While the group was ultimately unsuccessful in this endeavor, failing to prevent Ellsberg from being acquitted, they remained together. On June 17, 1972, the plumbers were caught sneaking around the Watergate Hotel to place listening devices in the Democratic Committee's headquarters, allegedly under the orders of Richard Nixon. E. Howard Hunt describes their effort in his memoir, American Spy, My Secret History in the CIA, Watergate, and Beyond. The scandal ruined the reputation of Richard Nixon and eventually led him to resigning from office. But how much more was the government hiding in these times? During the Vietnam War, there was a secret military campaign in Laos and Cambodia to prevent the Viet Cong troops from moving supplies into Vietnam. According to the book, The Vietnam War, nearly 150,000 troops and several tactical nuclear weapons were sent into Laos under the orders of President John F. Kennedy. Speaking of whom, there is much more controversy regarding the assassination of JFK and the motive of the perpetrator, or perhaps perpetrators. The book titled The CIA and JFK Assassination details the conspiracy theory in great detail. To this day, many people believe that the CIA was either responsible for or had some sort of involvement in a somewhat mysterious assassination. While the actual validity of this conspiracy is questionable at best, it stands as a testament to how little information was made publicly available regarding the event, and how little the general populace has come to trust the government. Even more sinister than that was the very real series of experiments conducted on US soil known as MKUltra, Project MKUltra and the Search for Mind Control. Clandestine Use LSD by Tanny Linville does a very good job cataloging these procedures, history, and eventual public reveal of this terrible experiment performed on innocent US citizens. What was it exactly? In essence, MKUltra's end goal was to find a method of mind control for overseas use in espionage tactics, ideally through the use of psychoactive drugs like LSD. Ultimately, the team of researchers didn't make any significant findings, and the data was hidden away for years until it was uncovered by a series of Freedom of Information Act requests in 1977. Even into the next century, the government continued to hide massive information from the public. An ACLU article titled The Government's 9/11 Secrecy Obsession details the excessive secrecy measures put in place around the time of the September 11th attacks, which not only led to the government's slow response to the disaster leading up to it, but also allowed government agencies to act in much greater secrecy and keep extensive surveillance on citizens. The government also used the secrecy to hide even more disturbing endeavors, namely the secret prison known as Guantanamo Bay. Karen Greenberg's book, The Least Worst Place, describes the creation and history of the site where terrorists and prisoners of war are kept to this day and subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques and other forms of inhumane torture in order to get information from them. While the detention camp still operates today despite public outcry, it was formerly kept a secret from the American public and the rest of the world, which is why it was located away from American soil. Purposeful lies and deception have continued to this very day, with one particularly grievous example occurring as recently as 2020 when, during a rally, President Donald Trump said the following regarding the COVID-19 virus before the global quarantine began. In theory, when it gets a little warmer and miraculously goes away, it is easy to say that the president simply wasn't aware of how dangerous the virus was. However, in a private interview for Bob Woodward's book, the president admitted that, purposely downplaying the virus, saying, quote, "This is deadly stuff." Despite all of this, hope is not lost when it comes to information. There has been a few individuals who have taken freedom of information into their own hands. Of course, we've already discussed Daniel Ellsberg, but there was another, very infamous individual named Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was previously a contractor for NSA, National Security Agency, which serves as a very important role in preserving government secrecy in the United States. Frustrated with government surveillance both inside and outside of the country, Edward Snowden used the skills that he had used in his everyday job to hack into the NSA database, and he leaked information regarding the extent of which the government was spying on its citizens as well as in other countries. This created a massive national uproar as Snowden was forced to flee the United States and seek asylum in Russia. But what if you want to be aware of hidden information but don't have this particular set of skills? Simple. If you want to know more about a particular government agency, then you can use the Freedom of Information Act. This law requires government agencies to make public their rules and procedures, the general course and methods by which their functions are channeled and determined, etc. The law also allows citizens to submit a request for specific information on an agency. Although charges may apply with some agencies, like the CIA, most of them aren't required to completely divulge the information in order to avoid an international crisis. In summary, when it comes to our right to knowledge and information, it isn't all doom and gloom. The long history of deception between the federal government and the general population is intimidating and certainly frustrating to say the least. While it is true that a few white lies here and there aren't harmless, in the grand scheme of things, and some pieces of information are best left hidden, we as a people have a right to know things, especially when the government knows exponentially more about us than it should, experiments on us, and sends our troops to the front lines of military endeavor that we are never told about. By all accounts, the government has responsibility to keep us informed on matters of importance, both great and small.